weight room, man. Getting back in shape again.
I like those live talking shows.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Larking.
Because people have no, you can tell if they speak the truth or not.
Yeah, that's
You're
true.
just gonna have to watch the monitor.
Okay,
see
so
what-
basically when I see myself, I know where.
There you go.
Okay. Hello, I'd like to welcome everybody to In Step with Tomorrow. But before we get into the program, I'd like to give you a little brief history on what In Step with Tomorrow is really about. In Step with Tomorrow began in 1993 with what was then the Black Student Union and Phi Beta Sigma fraternity. We took a program into the high schools that gave the high school people something from the African American culture. We had songs, we had dancing, we had monologues, and we had plays. And what this program is about to do is we're about to expand from that. Since that was in 1993, a lot of those people have moved on. So today, with Instead with Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about racism. Racism is not just a local problem. Racism is something that affects the whole country, and that's what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to introduce my guest for you. Right here we have Edward Sanford. Right here we have his wife, Gail Bruce Sanford. And right here we have Alan Matt. And to begin with, let's just open it up right off the bat and let's figure out what is racism. Let's tell the people out there, what is racism?
Well, I think very simply, racism is indifferent treatment that is inflicted upon a group of people institutionally, socially, and personally based on race. And this is a very serious type of a phenomenon to have to deal with within a society when one is making those types of judgment, those types of prejudice based on, say, a person's race or affiliation with the race.
Yeah, see, I think a lot of people don't really understand that racism in itself is really pathetic that it's happening here in 1996 with all that has happened in the past.
Absolutely.
I think that history has told us that if we do not study it, it will repeat itself.
Absolutely.
And I think that is something that we're seeing here in the United States today with, the neo-Nazis coming back and that whole movement just popping up out of nowhere, basically. And, and I think that is a shame. So.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And racism, of course, is based on a lot of ignorance within the society. And in today's society, here we are in 1996, talking about a phenomenon that was very, very prevalent back at the time period of, say, Frederick Douglass. He was talking about some of the same issues that we would possibly talk about this afternoon. And people prior to him during the Holocaust of African enslavement, the same type of issues were there with the plight of the Native American, first here on the American soils. You can see that whole issue of racism brought up and taking land away from a people that truly owned it at an earlier time period. Then taking people from the continent of Africa and institutionalizing them. I think that's where the phenomenon of racism began here, according to Kenneth Stamp, in a book entitled The Peculiar Institution, and Blasgamy and others, who deals with this whole issue of we can certainly target it toward that particular time period as the beginning, I would say.
Okay. So how do you feel as a person of color? How do you feel? Since you've been here, I'm not from here.
Yes.
I know the two of you are not from here, and Alan may be the only one of us that is actually from here.
Well, yes.
So how do you feel as a person of color?
Well, yes. That's a very interesting question. Racism doesn't have a particular location or region.
Yeah.
It is national and possibly international. And I think it is a certain type of disease that perpetuates itself in the attitudes of others, and they have a tendency to feel that in one's daily life activity. You know, there are numerous examples out there that have occurred within our lifetime. You know, recently, for instance, with certain institutions inflicting certain pain upon a group of people. Most recent incident of a group of immigrants trying to come into the United States, and you could see indifferent treatment placed upon them. They were, of course, wrong, but then, of course, they did not have to be beat and punished in a certain way. So you can see that. I think that's a part of the mindset, in a way, of people who inflict this type of pain based on a different person's look, pigmentations, or what have you. Yeah, so as a person that lives here in society, I think it is certainly real. It certainly exists, and to a certain degree, you just feel it, you know. But you understand it. You know how to deal with it. Yeah.
I think, coming from my perspective, I'd like to say that it's something that I have tried to understand as much as possible, and with trying to understand where it's coming from, then I'm better prepared to handle it whenever I encounter it, so that I feel like I'm always prepared and I can expect anything, and that I'm not really surprised when it does occur.
Yes.
Yeah, I know as myself personally, when I first came here to Missoula, it was really a culture shock to me. And I think that maybe even I am a culture shock to a lot of people in Missoula. You know, I don't think that they have a really opportunity to sit down and break bread and talk to me. And just a couple days ago, I was talking to a good friend of mine who just happens to be Caucasian. And him and his wife were in the Los Angeles area on their honeymoon, and they went to see a movie. And they went to a theater that African Americans predominantly go to, and they walked in there, and they were the only white people in there. And for the first time, he felt, you know, what I felt when I got here, and it felt real good for me to hear him to be able to relate with somebody that wasn't of the same race to me, because you know, I can relate to everybody on here, but I think it's real special when somebody from the Caucasian descent, you know, can sit here and say, yes, Stace, you know, I know how you feel, you know, but you know, I wish everybody would know that feeling, you know, and I think that is real special.
Yes.
How about you, Alan?
Well, I'm from the Missoula area, and I grew up just north of here, up in St. Ignatius, and racism wasn't a real problem. I went to a predominantly white high school, and I was well respected and well treated. But I never seen too many black people or people of color until after I left the reservation and I went into the service. There was there was an old man up in St. Ignatius. His name was George Washington something, but he recently died, and a couple years ago, I'll tell you a story about him. His house burned down, and the tribe gave him some land and built him a new house. So I don't think that shows racism at all. But there is racism. It's something that I lived with all my life, and if in my opinion, it's a very small minority of people that's not representative of the whites on the reservation. Like I said, I grew up and went to school in St. Ignatius, and it was predominantly white, and I have many friends there. There are people today who are attacking the tribe's authority to keep the water clean and the air clean and to protect the forest and the animals and stuff. But these people are really the minority, and you find these in every community.
Well, since I've been here, you know, I have been told that the racism toward the Native American people is even worse than towards my people. And that is something that I really have trouble understanding, basically for the simple fact that you were already here before they even got here. So, I mean, could you explain that a little bit? Because I don't really understand it myself.
Well, back when I was young, when I first discharged from the service, I went to school at the University of Montana here, and there used to be a bar downtown called Eddie's Club. And there was a sign on the door that said, "No Indians or dogs allowed." But at that time, you know, I never seen too many people of color. Now, interesting enough, there was a university professor by the name of Ulysses C. Doss, who was a black studies person. I think he was director of the Black Studies program, and he encouraged 10 of us Indian students to. He sponsored us and encouraged us to form the Native American Indian Club, the Kayo. We named it the Kayo Indian Club, and he sponsored us and he encouraged us. And at the time I didn't really know there were black people. I met him, and he was one of the first black people I met.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, there is racism out there, and in my opinion, it's mostly the ongoing hatred with the Indian people.
Yeah. Well, I know with me, I think we can all agree that racism is not something that we're just born with. I think it's something that you're either taught or because I know that you just as a child you do not come up and just automatically dislike somebody because of their color.
Well, it's a form of prejudice, and prejudice, as we all know, is certainly learned.
Yes.
So these are behaviors and attitudes that we pick up from our environment, certainly.
Yeah. Well, where did you first recognize racism? I mean, it was when you were 5 years old, 10 years old. I'll start over here. When did you?
Well, that's an interesting question. I grew up in Oxford, North Carolina.
Okay.
And if you know historically, after 1954 with the Brown versus the Board of Education, many of the school districts within the United States started to become desegregated. North Carolina was one of the last states, if not the last, to implement a desegregation policy. So this was in 1954, and I was born in 1958. And of course, it wasn't until the 7th or 8th grade that the schools had actually become desegregated. And I've always made a distinction between a desegregated school system and one that has been integrated. There's a clear distinction there with me, and I've done research in this particular area at Duke University and looking at those types of distinctions as well. So I would have to say, at that very age, even in kindergarten and in pre-K and first grade through the 7th grade, there were certain types of implications that were just within the society that I was born into that existed. And I think that set a mindset within the environment of that small town that I grew up in, of knowing that housing situations were segregated. And I can remember very vividly of going to certain restaurants and people of African descent or African Americans would have to go to the little pull-up window, and my father and mother would go there to get the food. While if you were Caucasian, you could go inside to eat, of course, in the restaurant.
Yeah.
And things were, of course, segregated as well. At the doctors, you would have a certain sections where African Americans would sit and another section where Caucasians would sit. And so, I can remember it even at that early age. And then, of course, when school systems were desegregated, you were not totally accepted just going into those school systems. People had to break down certain prejudices that they would have prior to that time. Because you implement a law that doesn't necessarily change attitudes and behaviors. So those things had to be changed and worked on. But there has been progress made. I think Alan kind of noted that as well. Looking at it from that time period up to where I am now, if you go back, things will be totally different. So you can see vast changes within the society. But then there are certain things out there that continues to persist here in America. And I think Gail mentioned a minute ago about the whole issue of prejudice and how that is something that is learned. And certain things within our educational systems, I would say, and what I teach in my classes, is that we have to try to come about with a different curriculum that will be more inclusive rather than exclusive. And I think if we can do that, then we can start breaking down some of the barriers of prejudice. Yeah, because it is an ignorance that has to be, some learning some education, re-education, if you will, has to take place. Yeah.
I think it's in part a lack of exposure to that which is different. And maybe for some of us, we tend to feel that we are justified in some of our attitudes and behaviors because we have not been adequately exposed. Maybe we grew up in very monocultural communities, so we have not had to have interactions with others who are different. But I don't think we need to make excuses based on that, because we can certainly educate ourselves. We have libraries, we have higher places of education when we can get exposure
Absolutely.
to different people, to different cultures, religion, geography, history, in very many different forms and fashions, certainly.
When you look at some of the international students, for an example, and when they've come up with their educational curriculums, they've taken things that are related to more cultural geography. So at a very young age, first, second, third, fourth, fifth grades, they get an opportunity to learn the cultures of people all across the world. And I think that has an impact directly and indirectly on their outlook at others.
Yeah.
And if I can also mention, Maya Angelou has a very interesting book. One, it's entitled "Would Take Nothing for My Journey Now." And in there she has a chapter that's only 2 pages long, but it's very powerful. And she challenges the American to travel. She says that in America that we can travel from the East Coast to the West Coast, a 3,000 or more mile radius, and speak the same language without having any difference there. And she says if you need to go to Africa, to Asia, to Europe, to all these other countries, and experience the difference and the diversity that's there. And even if you can't have that opportunity to travel, as Gail just mentioned, I think there's a lot of literature out there that one can read. So even at the age of 2 and 3, we need to start reading a multicultural type of books to our children, not just coming from one focus, that shares the Native American experience, the African experience, the Asian experience, the Chinese experience, the Japanese experience, and on and on and on. You see, that would help people have a different mindset, I think, in growing up.
I think we need to provide more of a balance to people. So
Yes.
we need to furnish our youngsters with more positive role models from every different society.
Mhm.
And I think that's one way of helping with this particular problem.
Yes, yes.
I would like to say something on what you just mentioned, role models.
Mhm.
One of the things with the Indian people is the stereotype of a drunken Indian.
Mhm.
You know, that's really hurt us. But yet, if you went and visited the reservation, you'd find people who don't drink, who don't do drugs. They're very moral people,
Mhm.
Christian people. And so, yeah, that is a problem with it, the stereotype of a drunken
Yeah.
Indian.
Certainly.
And that brings up a whole other issue. You know, sometimes here we are in a media coverage right now, but sometimes our media projects images in a very misrepresentative way.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that needs to be worked on as well, because I think that was a very profound statement that Alan just made, in that how sometimes things can be extorted to an extent that people started to believe in them. And I think that's what we experience
Yeah.
when we go to different places, and everywhere we go, we have to experience this indifferent treatment based on people's perceptions.
Yeah.
That's based on ignorance, that's based on untruths. So I think as we can get closer to what I call capital T, or truth, we can make a social change within the society, you know, for the betterment of all people.
Yeah.
Also, I'd like to say, it's my opportunity to say this,
Yes.
that I've been studying the nature of Satan, because a lot of people study the Bible, and they know a lot about God, and they know a lot about Jesus, but it's the nature of Satan, which we're talking about racism, prejudice, bigotry, and those things that are connected with fear, and this is the nature of Satan. I mean, the racism on the reservation wasn't great, but it's growing. Why is it growing? Because of the fear that the people who first of all invaded the reservation and took the land from the Indians unjustly want to save Montana as the last best place for themselves, where they can charge a lot of money for the out-of-state people to come. You know, so they want control of our water, our land, all of our resources. So, so the racism is sort of growing, but I think you're talking about solutions to racism, and this is I think a wonderful start. People need to be informed. Information is a good
That's right.
way to combat racism.
Yes.
Education.
I agree. I think, too, that as a people, we need to start thinking more about others, about building our communities, about strengthening our communities. And I think that we tend to be too self-centered in our motives, in our initiatives. So we think less of others, and we do not stretch our hand out to reach others enough. And we need to start being more inclusive in thinking about others and trying to help others. so that in the long run we'll be helping all of humanity. And I think if we start from a perspective like that, there'll be less of a tendency to stereotype or to inflict maybe economic exploitation or what have you on others, which I think that economic exploitation is a big part of racism too, certainly.
Absolutely. And as you may very well know, about a week ago, African American Studies, along with a few other organizations, sponsored a symposium on racism and reconciliation in America. And out of that came this whole notion of forgiveness and reconciliation. But we also felt very strongly that, as you just mentioned, people have to be historically connected to some of the issues that happened in the past for people to understand why you have to reconcile and forgive and to bring about a certain level of change. So many people in today's generation want to say, well, I didn't have anything to do with the plight of the Native American or the plight of slavery here in America. Well, no, and you don't necessarily have to feel accountable or ashamed or anything of that nature. But I think it is responsibility for people to be educated about what happened. And then you bring about a certain level of sensitivity as a result of being educated, toward those issues. I know I usually give the example, if you are not educated about it, and if you're not sensitive to it, and if you have a person that becomes a senator or a congressman or maybe a president, then they will not vote for social policy in a certain way. But if you are historically connected to it and don't feel like there's this remoteness to what happened in the past and there's not a connectedness to it, then you'd have a tendency not to be sensitive to it. But if you are historically related to it and familiar with the issues, then you can be sensitive to it and can understand the connection as to why we are discussing this evening about racism. Same thing that our ancestors have talked about in the past.
I think, too, there's a tendency for some people today to feel blamed for racism. And their response is, well, I had nothing to do with it. Or when are African Americans or Native Americans going to get over their anger? What's this all about? And I think we need to stop engaging in that type of a thinking and instead to look at the individual responsibility we have towards mankind, towards others, our fellow human beings, and to think that if we try to improve the quality of life for another individual, that we are also improving the quality of life for ourselves. So together, we are all parts of that linkage, maybe in a chain, and we need to think of it from that perspective.
When racism first hit me was when I went away from my reservation into the service. And when I came out of the service, I was aware of racism. And so I started to become an angry young Indian. We've survived 500 years of oppression, and I started to hate that white man and his ways, But I'll tell you what, one of the greatest feelings is forgiveness. Say, hey, I forgive you, and really mean it. It's a great feeling. But it's like you say, this is the basis. Love is the basis of overcoming hatred and racism. Go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're getting low on time. I think we have the special opportunity of having you here to explain to us the medicine wheel. I think when I sat down with you a few days ago and you explained it to me, I think that has a lot to do with the solution, and I'm really glad that you came here and you're going to share that with us. So feel free to.
Yeah, well, I was waiting for this opportunity because both Gail and Edward both were talking about the prophecy of this medicine wheel here, and what it deals with is the medicine wheel here is represents the universe by the blue, and in the universe there are 4 races of people: the white race, the black race, the yellow, and the red. Now there's significances in the directions that they come from, but what we want to talk about is overcoming the racism. There's a prophecy that all 4 of these people are going to bring to the center their knowledge and their gifts that they were given in the beginning, which became corrupt over the civilizations, and that we're all going to learn from each other and share with each other and live in harmony and peace with the universe. And that's what Gail was talking and Edward was talking about. overcoming this racism. And it's a prophecy, and I believe that we're going to do it. There's a song that we sing. It's called the Unity Song, and there is, you know, if you can imagine that we are truly unified and that we take our differences and share them and make them a strength, this could be a very powerful country, this could be a very powerful state, and this could be a very powerful world.
That's right.
That's so true.
Yeah. I think here in Montana, there's a unique opportunity to make an example for the rest of the world. And we need to do that, and I think this is a great beginning. I think that the public tonight got a lot of solutions. You know, we talked about the will, we talked about education, we talked about love. And I think all of those are components that are going to bring this whole racism thing to an end, because it needs to come to an end. It needs to come to an end soon. We only have a couple minutes left. You guys have any last comments that you'd like to make?
No, I would just like to thank you very much for having
Well, I'd like to thank
me
you guys
here.
for...
I'd like to say that
it's.
it's certainly a big challenge, but I'd like us not to give up on the challenge.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And as we look at it historically, we can see some concrete evidence of change that has taken place. And you can't leave out the struggles of coming out of the Civil War through the early movements of the 30s, 40s, and 50s that led into the 1960s movement. And I think we need to understand those movements, and a new type of movement has to take place today.
Yeah.
And we have to continue hope and make sure everyone can work together for the betterment of humankind.
I would like to invite anybody watching this program to contact MCAT if they have
Yes.
something that they want to add to, share with us, or whatever.
Because we're going to do this again. We're going to do this again, and we're going to open it up to everybody. Well, we're just about out. We're out of time, actually. I would just like to say, everybody who gets a chance to see this program, when you walk out of your house tomorrow, just try to make a good step to make tomorrow better for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Very good.
It's like a real TV show. I'm delighted. It was great.